Welcome, friends, to JCT TV. This is Bible study for the 21st century. So, friends, for those of you who follow JCT, you know that we have for many months, if not a few years now, been in the book of Matthew. Now we're getting at what Jesus has to say about the end of days in Matthew 24, 25, 26. It's terrific stuff. And I have a special guest who specializes in Old Testament and New Testament prophetic content, Dr. Van Johnson, who is Dean of Master's Seminary and Adjunct Professor of New Testament at Tyndale Seminary. Great guy. You're going to love it.
Jim Cantelon Today is a program dedicated to the teaching of the good news of Jesus Christ. This all through the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. JCT also brings to you encouraging testimonies and stories from Christian leaders all over the globe. If this program has added value to your life, would you please consider becoming a partner? To do so, simply contact us by phone, mail, or online.
So happy to have Van Johnson back with us, who's the Dean of Master's College and also Adjunct Professor of New Testament.
Master's Seminary, Jim.
I'm sorry, Master's Seminary.
Right. I cannot go through another episode
I misrepresented
with this
you.
hanging over my
head. I misrepresented you, Dr. Johnson.
Yeah, there you go.
Adjunct Professor of New Testament at Tyndale.
Yes.
We got to meet you last week. Let's pick up where you left off in terms of your very interesting focus of study, not just towards your doctorate, but subsequently as a teacher. When I was pastoring in Jerusalem, I would say conservatively hundreds of people come through over the course of those 7 years from various parts of the world who were there for a reason. They had figured it out.
Sure.
They knew what the end of days meant. They knew when Jesus was coming back again. They had it all cased. They had written about it in many cases. One guy had written a book, 88 Reasons Why Jesus is Coming Back in 1988.
Right.
He wanted
I saw that book.
Yeah, if he wanted to preach in my church, I wouldn't let him.
Uh-huh.
But it seems to me that if there's anything that has tripped up most biblical enthusiasts with regard to the end of days, it's eschatology. Is it possible to have an intelligent, semi-systematic approach to eschatology, or is it all a great mystery?
Yeah, well, okay. Best question you've asked me yet. This one I won't struggle to answer, like, why did you not fall apart as a teenager?
That was last week.
That was last week.
Yeah, we're moving on.
And I so enjoyed it, I'm wearing the same clothes again this week to pick it up.
Nobody would even notice, except that you mentioned it.
And it's the same cup of coffee, too.
Tell me that's not the case.
Yeah, that's
anyway, carry on.
So I end up going to work with Richard Longnecker at University of Toronto Wycliffe College, and so I end up in eschatology, looking at the end of the world. And I soon realized, reading all these books written by pious Jews, that the book of Revelation maybe was very similar to what I was reading, and perhaps what I had learned reading the Jewish authors that preceded John's work, I should be reading in the same way. I found that there wasn't one clear system in Jewish apocalyptic literature for the end, but various perspectives and images. So what I found were various depictions of what the end would look like, as if, okay, here's an image, there's an image, there's an image, but all pointing to a similar reality, that at the end of the age, which is a little different than the Old Testament perspective, where the end of the age is not as clearly defined as better days ahead. But in the New Testament, clearly there's an eschatology that looks beyond this one. You'd have all these images of what the mind really can't conceive. So the truth is that there's a God to be reckoned with, there's a future, there's a place reserved for those who have been faithful to God, there's a place reserved for those who have been unfaithful to God, but various images of it. So here's what was fascinating to me, Jim. I went looking for a system and didn't find one, but what I saw were various depictions to remind me that what I do in life today counts, because there is a future where what I am doing will matter. There is a God, there is reward, there is punishment. And so I soured on systems because of my doctoral work. Not just because it was my doctoral work, and after a while you do get tired of thinking about the same things, but I didn't find a system there. So then when I go to the book of Revelation, and I'm aware that there is a whole history of books that carefully systematize the book of Revelation, try and create time periods and say, okay, those chapters refer to this time period. In other words, you try to make Revelation match the history of the church, for instance, right? And then you get to the last couple chapters, 20 and 21, and you stop there and you say, okay, well, obviously this aspect's future. And I looked at those charts after having done work at the University of Toronto and thought, I think we're asking the wrong questions of the text. I think instead of asking, how do bowls meet trumpets in Revelation? How do we put these in sequence? I think it's better to say, okay, let's talk about the end of the world in terms of when trumpets sound, but let's go to another imagery now without trying to build it into a system. Various visions about the same thing. And if we could recover that, Jim, I tell my students all the time, the one most underused book in the New Testament, or poorly used, is the book of Revelation, because we've gone there looking for systems rather than letting the power of this book confront us. And so here's one of those cases where what I did in university at the doctoral level has really helped my understanding of the New Testament, and it helped me with the book of Revelation. So I have soured on systems. So even in my own denomination, you would know this, we are working at redrafting the statement of fundamental and essential truths that all credential holders will sign. There was, still is, because we haven't gotten to the end of the process yet, a fairly lengthy, detailed section on eschatology, the end of time, with all of the categories. And my work with the committee, because I am co-chair with, I think you had Dave Wells on, I'm co-chair with him trying to rewrite this. We are suggesting to the constituency, look, there's systems out there. Every system has some Bible passages they can use. It's not that one's biblical and another is not. And so if somebody is watching and right now they're leaning forward saying, I hope he doesn't say anything negative about mine. Right. What I'm saying to you is, I'm sort of skeptical that any one system captures it all, right? And so what we're going to do is we rewrite the statement is focus on primary events of the end and leave it to the credential holders or to the viewers to figure out which system that connects them works best for them, because I just don't think you find systems there.
You know, pastoring in Jerusalem, I had all these various voices sounding in my ear in terms of systematic
I bet you did.
Interpretation of the end of days. And I got to the point where I said, call me simplistic, call me what you will, but I'll take Revelation for what it claims to be, and that is a revelation from and of Jesus Christ. Good. I'll look for Jesus in the book of Revelation. Good. When I find him there, then I'll see what I can learn about him there. But as for a lot of the other apocalyptic material in the book of Revelation, to me, it's like looking at a kaleidoscope. And every time you turn that kaleidoscope, the pattern changes. And to try to make systematic sense of that is just simply a waste of time and an exercise in frustration. But Jesus, he comes through in the book of Revelation, shining not only as the Lamb who is slain, but as the Lion of Judah, as the conquering Lord. And that to me is the wonder and the beauty and the power of the book of Revelation. Is that overly simplistic to approach it that way?
No. So when I do my doctoral work, I stop short of Revelation. I had just started to cross the border from the intertestamental period, all the Jewish writings, into the New Testament, and my doctoral committee said, okay, stop. Okay, enough, right? This is not your life's work,
Yeah.
right? Stop. So I stopped. And as a result, I never did any systematic study in Revelation other than just casual reading, because I had sort of burnt myself out a little bit looking at all the eschatological stuff and all the systems. And so I stopped. So a couple years ago, I actually hosted a course on the book of Revelation, and I had two experts come in and they were talking about it. And I found it fascinating because I was now experiencing the book of Revelation in somewhat of a fresh way. And why I'm talking to you about this is something you just said. You said when you go to the book of Revelation, you look for Jesus.
Yeah.
Out of my training, I was looking for the martyrs. Okay. So in Jewish apocalyptic, the literature arises because there's a bit of a skepticism that maybe God is going to fulfill all of his promises here and now, but maybe in the afterlife. What drives apocalyptic thinking is the most egregious examples of where it seems like the covenant of God fails is when your best and your most devout are struck down early in life, the martyrs. And so I had been taught reading Jewish apocalyptic, look at the way they treat the martyrs, because they were often given a special space. Okay, so you and I could be thinking of the martyrs in and around the throne. But what struck me, Jim, was so I'm looking for the martyrs, and as I'm hearing these professors talk about these initial visions of Jesus, and boy, you can't get through the first chapter or two without these startling visions of Jesus. There's this wonderful mash-up of Jesus as Lion of Judah, Messianic, but then for Hebrew ears, someone slaughtered as Messiah, right? The Lamb. And it struck me sitting in that classroom that day at Tyndale, where we hold all of our classes, that in looking for the martyrs, I might have missed the significance of Jesus as the Lamb who was martyred. And so that when you wandered into that book, all of those who have suffered violence, who have been cut down before their 80, those who have suffered, Jesus is the one who represents the great hope before any of the architecture of heaven is described, right? Before you start describing the buildings and the pavement. Here is the great hope for those who have been treated unjustly, some even murdered. Jesus presents himself to us as the triumphant Lamb that was slaughtered, and he embodies the great hope of the martyr.
Yeah. I can hardly wait for our next interview. Next week, we'll continue with Dr. Van Johnson. I know a lot of you are really interested in this, and of course I'm dealing with it right now in Matthew 24. More of that after this.
JCT TV is the official voice of WOW, working for orphans and widows. Jim Cantelon is the founder of WOW and has been ministering to orphans and widows in distress for 18 years. WOW's focus is home-based care for the dying. The horizon is vast, with thousands of the least of these in Africa and India. WOW depends on your generous support. To connect with us, you can call us at 1-800-969-9551, or you can visit us online at wowmission.com.
Today we're picking up Jesus' words about the end of days in Matthew 24, and we're in verse 25. Or I should say 45, verse 45. Who then is the faithful and wise servant whom the master has put in charge of the servants in his household to give them their food at the proper time? It will be good for that servant whose master finds him doing so when he returns. Truly, I tell you, he will put him in charge of all his possessions. But suppose that servant is wicked and says to himself, my master is staying away a long time, and he then begins to beat his fellow servants and to eat and drink with drunkards. The master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour he is not aware of. He will cut him to pieces, and assign him a place with the hypocrites, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now, this is Jesus talking here. And, you know, friends, often when we encourage people to read the Bible, we forget that there are lines like this one. He will cut him to pieces, assign him a place with the hypocrites. Also, you read parts of the Old Testament and you see some pretty raw material there too. Keep in mind that there's a certain historical, cultural context in which all these words are written and spoken. And some of that which maybe offends us greatly today would be not so offensive in that day. That's just simply the way it is. But here you got a passage dealing with good and bad servants, and there is both a kind of a space-time and also a kingdom of heaven meaning to this. Now, the surprise I mentioned at the top of the show, I'd actually introduced it last week and we'll continue today, is that my interview guest, Van Johnson, has stayed on. And you're going to share this with me, Van. I'm really thrilled you're here. The good and the bad servant concept, it keeps cropping up in Jesus' parables and comments. We don't relate to it as much because we don't live with slavery, at least in our culture, and nor do most of us have the wherewithal to afford servants. But this is a common currency in Jesus' time.
The slaves do the work. They are the economy.
Yeah. And it wasn't a case just of them having slaves that had been won in war. Right. In some cases, it was even a fellow Hebrew who had sold himself into slavery to pay a debt, right? Okay, so this space-time and kingdom of heaven sort of dichotomy here. In the short term, we should be faithful with a view to the long term where we'll be rewarded. Right. But if we're not faithful, and we do not live with a view to the long time, a pretty nasty future awaits.
Yeah.
What do you think about this? I mean, Jesus is obviously, many times he's hyperbolic. You know,
Absolutely.
Yeah. Sometimes he talks about cutting off your hand if it offends you, plucking out an eye if it offends you. He doesn't want a bunch of dismembered disciples following him around, but he's making
not for a moment.
A hyperbolic statement.
Yes, he is. And remember, he is an itinerant preacher. He's living in an oral culture. And if you are constantly speaking to people, the way that you will cause them to remember is with the statement that's a little bit larger than they're used to hearing. Who forgets this if they've heard Jesus say it? Yeah. So I think there's something to that, right?
Yeah, and there's also the implication that the future for those who are not faithful is dire.
Right.
And this raises, you know, the thorny issue of future punishment. I think we're all ready to embrace the concept of future reward. But let's go off script here for a bit.
Sure.
In terms of your studies, in your doctoral studies and your professorship, vis-a-vis taking students through eschatology and all of that, how do you deal with that future punishment concept?
I think what I try to help the students do is see it as a concept that runs all the way through, that there are consequences for what you do. isn't this an interesting conversation in light of the fact that we talk about how we've made Christianity very individual? This is shocking, because we're thinking, oh, I thought this was about me.
Right.
What do you mean about you?
Yeah.
Right? So it's a complete turnaround. But with my students, I say, look, whenever we think about the afterlife and the nature of punishment, we have some strong imagery in the text. Here's another one. But bear in mind that right from the beginning, the fall of Adam and Eve in the garden, there was a degree of separation that started it off. He moves them out of paradise. He blocks the door. You're not coming back in here. The spiritual separation precedes the physical one. It's always the spiritual relationship with God that triggers the death factor. We've overrated physical death. The worst part of what Adam and Eve faced was that they were no longer walking with God in the garden. It's that first degree of separation. And then physical death follows on the spiritual. So I tell the students, look, right from the very beginning, there's nothing more important than your relationship with God. It runs all the way through. It's expressed in different ways, different places, but there you see it right at the very beginning. So if viewers have been tracking with us week by week, and I'm sure many have, this idea of going to Sheol, which I talked about, that place of the dead, there was another idea then that what Adam and Eve brought into the world, death, which Paul will talk about Romans 5, is a further separation from God, because it's all relational. So when I see imagery like this, I think the greatest horror is not necessarily how it's described, but the idea that there is any kind of existence which knows nothing of God's goodness and blessing. To me, that's the most horrific image, and everything else is imagery that's helping me picture it, but that's the worst.
I do a lot of driving, a lot of long distance driving. In my, every weekend I'm out preaching somewhere, and then I have a daughter in Texas. I drive to see her once or twice a year. I've driven across Canada, across the States a few times, and as I'm doing so, I listen to the radio in my truck. Yes, I drive a truck. Kathy is there with me, co-driver, and I happen to have satellite radio, so I've got a lot of options.
Right.
And so, we listen to contemporary music, we listen to classical music, we listen to bluegrass, if you can believe it, and sometimes we listen to country and western. There must be 60 or 70 country and western stations out there. What's interesting about the country and western stations, this is where I'm heading, is that 99% of them are about broken relationships.
Yeah.
The lyrics are about broken relationships.
There you go.
I'm leaving, my heart's broken, you've left me, and but what always emerges in my thinking as I'm listening to some of these pathetic lyrics is we're made for relationships.
Yeah, that's right.
And even in space and time here, my heart's desire is to find that kindred spirit with whom I can share the rest of my life.
Right.
And I've always, been grateful to the Lord that Kathy and I found each other when we did. We're about to enter our 50th year of marriage. I can't believe it. But there's a greater relational draw yet, and that is the draw to be in relationship with my Heavenly Father, the one who created me. Right. And I agree with you. Friends, when Jesus talks about future punishment, by any stretch, the most horrific aspect of future punishment, being made for a relationship, being made for love for God, being made for being loved by God, to be forever separate from Him. Yeah,
there you go.
That's really the thing, is it not?
Yeah, that's the thing.
And I try, you watch this program, friends. You know that I don't pound the Bible, and I'm not constantly haranguing you about your need for God. I'm assuming you got a brain, and as we're dealing with the Scripture, somehow the Holy Spirit is enabling you to think it through and to seriously consider the import of some of these words. But when we have Jesus here talking about future punishment, we got to take that seriously. And if, in fact, the most horrific aspect of that future punishment is being separated from the one who made us, from the one who loves us, who would want that? I don't want that. This is the horror of dysfunctional life in the 21st century. So many of us are broken relationally. You know, we've had 1, 2, 3 marriages. We've never really been loved. We never really have had one good friend. You know, well, just put that on steroids and think about an eternity without the one for whom you were made.
Right.
I think, friends, when we think in those terms, it's going to have a pretty serious impact on how we read the scriptures. And as we go through these few chapters at the end of Matthew, it's serious stuff, and we need to be thinking serious thoughts. I'll be back right after this break.
Friends, as you know, Jim Cantelon has been offering Cantelon's Casual Commentary as a Bible study supplement to his ongoing exposition of St. Matthew's Gospel on JCT TV. He's excited to offer Volume 4, which completes the Matthew study. The Transfiguration, Triumphal Entry, Crucifixion, and Resurrection of Jesus Christ are all covered in this volume. Like the first 3 volumes, it's concise, captivating, and casual. To order your copy, you can call, write, or go online. Write to Jim Cantelon today, Post Office Box 989, Burlington, Ontario, L7R3Y7, or call us at 519-415-8341. You can also order online at jimcantelontoday.com. Request Cantelon's Casual Commentary Volume 4, and for a gift in any amount, it will be sent to you. When you place your order, also consider becoming a monthly partner. Remember, your gifts help us build this ministry.
Friends, we come your way because of God's good grace and your generous provision as He leads you to provide. We represent WOW, Working for Orphans and Widows, which is a major missions ministry to orphans and widows impacted by HIV and AIDS that my wife Kathy and I founded almost 20 years ago. JCT now is a part of WOW, so we represent not only this teaching ministry but also working for orphans and widows. We really depend on your support. I'd love to send you one, if not all, of Cantelon's Casual Commentary. This is the entire book of Matthew that is a kind of an adjunct to what we're doing here on the television program. And if you've already got all 4, it'll only be a matter of a few weeks and I'll be getting out the first edition of Mark. I've finished writing it, just have to produce it now, and I'll do it as you enable us. I want to thank you for your support. It means a huge, huge difference in the lives of orphans and widows and in this ministry.
Contact us. Jim Cantelon today. P.O. Box 989, Burlington, Ontario, L7R 3Y7. If you're sending a check, make it payable to Jim Cantelon today. Or visit us online at jimcantelontoday.com and click Support.